days in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us, to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. But lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And I indeed will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. So I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gained honor for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen. And the angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of the cloud went from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camps and the camp of Israel. Thus it was a cloud and darkness to the one, and he gave light by night to the other, so that the one did not come near the other all that night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night. And he made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left hand. And the Egyptians pursued and went after them into the midst of the sea. All Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. Now it came to pass in the morning watch that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians, and he took off their chariot wheels, so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, on their chariots and on their horsemen. And Moses stretched out the hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. But the children of Israel had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on the right and on their left. So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. When we read the accounts in the Bible, such as these stories, specifically Exodus, because we have seen movies, we have seen shows, we always think about them as if it was something foreign, something that would never happen, or maybe never did happen, because we have never personally experienced something to that effect. at least not that I know of. That has never happened in history. You know, there's only one creation account, right? There's only one worldwide flooding to where it followed uh, a repopulation of the earth. There are not any more giants such as Goliath, because they're still giants, but not like Goliath. And there isn't any more ravens coming to feed us like Elijah. And so when we read such events like this, we sometimes just read them as if they were a little kid's story, a fairy tale. Even though we believe, we see them as such. And we don't trust that God could have or even could do this again. Now, I know that none of us have ever seen a crucifixion. None of us were present during that time when Jesus was crucified. And even to that point that I'm trying to make is that sometimes it's difficult for us to believe that such a thing was actually taking place or took place. And I bring up the topic of faith because we have not seen any of these events. We didn't see Jesus be crucified. We have never physically or visibly seen God. So how can we trust that this is what we're reading, the accounts that we've been studying are really true? Now for Israel, contrast is that they were there. They saw everything firsthand. In in a sense, they were baby believers at this point. Baby believers because they had only been following Moses or had seen what Moses was doing, because of the leading of God for the last 9 months. Remember, it took 9 months from the time that Moses presented himself to Pharaoh up to the point of when they left. And so they're still baby believers. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 says, faith is the substance, meaning there's something very real, is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence, meaning there's something tangible, something real there, of things not seen. Now, I was thinking about the account of the Red Sea, um, and how the people of Israel had so far experienced at least all those 10 plagues. Those are miracles. Remember, I had said that most of the people that are believers think that miracles are always something positive, or that it brings something good. But the miracles that God was bringing to pass, it was just 10 plagues, and there was devastation. Those were definitely miracles. Now, all of these people, Israel, the ones that are there right now at this point, they're about to cross the sea. They don't know they're about to cross the sea. They're at this point, all of them had been born into captivity. None of them have ever seen anything other than being slaves. That's all they knew what to do. They were born slaves, and going back to multiple generations, the grandparents, great grandparents, great 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 grandparents were slaves. Very little knowledge did they have left about the true God, because only a few stories were left that were passed down after all these generations. So they didn't know the works, at least not to the full extent. They didn't know the full extent of the work that God had done, prior to them, prior to Moses and Joseph and Jacob, going back to Abraham. They had very little knowledge of this. Now, these are sort of like baby Christians. Everything is new to them. They have only been following God or seeing the work of God for the last 9 months. But now, at the point that they're in, once they left Egypt, it has been approximately 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and they're about to face something or a big trial, major trial for them. Right after they've been delivered, or so they believe they were already delivered from the clutches of the enemy, the Egyptian bondage. So they're about to face something difficult as new believers. So this is a great test for them. And look at verse 1, and we're going to start in chapter 14. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Pi Heriroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal Zephon. You shall camp before it by the sea. So, back in chapter 13, the closing verses in 20, it says that they took their journey from Sukkot and camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of of fire by night from before the people. So they've been encamping in multiple places already. And God took them, it says here, on their journey, guiding them by night and day. God Himself. God Himself in the pillar of cloud and in the pillar of fire. And really, this is Jesus, the one that's guiding them. They don't know Him as Jesus, they only know Him as the angel of the Lord. Remember, every time this name appears, the angel of the Lord, that's Jesus. So Jesus is the one guiding them. And He's the one who brought them now to rest here by the sea. Now, and it had to be in an area where it was a vast open field or a vast open area, because remember, there are approximately 3 million people, including cattle and the herds and everything that they were carrying. So it's not just the people by themselves, it's everything that they were carrying, their possessions that they left with. So they had to have at least, a vast space, plain. It couldn't have been a mountainous area. And I make note of this because there has been multiple speculations and multiple arguments as to where they truly crossed, what area they truly crossed, and where are these locations that God gave us here in the Bible, these names, Pi Heriroth, Migdol, in opposite of Baal Zephon. Because the names, they have argued that the names haven't changed. There were names from the Old Testament, or they didn't know them as Old Testament, but they have been debated and argued, and they've come up with, I think it was about 15 different possible locations as to where they would have crossed, including one area where the water is very low to where it's only a few inches of water, which is, to me personally, that's not possible. And even if it was possible that they crossed in this area, you got to think about, once we read this, that was even a bigger miracle, because God says that He's going to put the waters over the Egyptians. So where did the water come from? So that's just something. Now, it says here that they came to Pi Heriroth. And this word comes from the Akkadian, or the Semites language, which is still Hebrew. And this word means or translates to mouth or opening, which to me, after studying and looking at the 15 plus or more than 15 different locations, and actually, Hank, can you put up those pictures? Looks like, to me, this is the opening canal that leads into the Red Sea. And let me leave that picture up right there. If you can look at the screen on the left hand side, you see here, this is the Red Sea, this is the opening of the canal, this is where they would have encamped. Go ahead and go to the next. Now this is a much closer view, thanks to Google Earth, of where the Red Sea is. Look at how vast that opening is. They said that they were opposite of Baal Zephon, and this is Pi Heriroth by Migdol. You see, this is now, once you zoom in, we're not going to zoom in, but once you zoom in, you can see that it's not a low crossing area. Is there another one? All right, so I want to point this out right now, where they're encamped about this place, this little red dot right here. If you can see it over here, this is the route they took, the yellow line. This is the route. They went up, and then they went down. They were encamped up here, and then they went down. There's a reason for that. We're going to see here why that is. This is not a mistake. There's a reason why God did this, because he was still waiting for evil Pharaoh to come, and he wanted to confuse them. So let's keep reading verse 3. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will again gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So this is what God wanted them to believe, Egypt. Exactly what they were thinking. Oh, they're lost, they're confused. The wilderness has closed them in. This is what Pharaoh is thinking. And they're thinking they're trapped. We got them now. And so here we go. Here we go. We're going to get them. Now, when Christians, remember, I'm thinking in terms, and I want you to think in terms of their baby Christians. Okay? So these are baby Christians, and even those who are not baby Christians, whenever there's something difficult that is coming against them or coming at them, there's a trial. We often forget what God has done. Remember, there has been 10 plagues that finished happening 2 weeks ago for them. 2 weeks ago for them. 10 plagues over the period of 9 months. And they've forgotten that this was God. I say this because we're going to see them that they're going to be very afraid. But God had already forewarned Moses that this was going to be the plan. Now, Moses didn't know how they were actually going to cross the Red Sea. God told them where to go, and Moses doesn't know. He's trusting by faith. This is what faith looks like. God tells you or instructs us to go to a specific location, go to a specific place, or do a specific work. You just don't have all the details, but you trust that God is going to bring it to pass, that he's going to be the one that does the work. Now, God has been repeating these things to them. Remember, even in the New Testament, God has been repeating these things to them so they wouldn't forget. Jesus reminds us too in the New Testament, in the book of John, chapter 16, verse 33. He says, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace." In me, not trust in you, not trust in the world. In me you have peace, because in the world you will, that's a promise from God, you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. In other words, be happy. Don't worry. I have overcome the world. So God reminds us multiple times over and over, I've already done it. I've done the work. You don't have to do anything. Now let's keep reading verse 5. Now it was told the king of Egypt that the peoples had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, "Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" So he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. Also, he took 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Egypt with captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with boldness. I want you to make notice of this. Take note there. If you want to highlight it or underline it, they went out with boldness. So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, camping by the sea, besides Pi Hahiroth, before Baal Zevon. So there has been at least 2 weeks. Remember that they left Egypt. They've been on this journey. God said after leaving Egypt. And someone had the bright idea to go tell Pharaoh, because it says somebody told Pharaoh, like, hey, did you know that the Egyptians left? Why did we let them go? They're asking Pharaoh, why did we let them go? And I'm just imagining Pharaoh said, you're right. Why did we let them go? Well, they have amnesia. They, 2 weeks, they were probably still mourning the death of the firstborn. 2 weeks, the death of the firstborn, and they've already forgotten not only the amnesia from the firstborn's death, but also those other 9 plagues. The land had to have been in devastation, in other words, completely destroyed. Because remember, some of his officials had asked him, hey, how long? Can't you see that the land has been destroyed? And now they've forgotten, and they came to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's like, oh yeah, who let them go? You did, remember? Apparently, their pride, the bitterness, that evil anger they had towards Israel was more important than the loss of the firstborn. Because, again, 2 weeks, they must have still been mourning for them. Now it says here, Pharaoh made ready his chariot and took his people. It doesn't say he took his army. It says he took his people. Now the army, we're going to see the army will come later. But here it says that he took his people, meaning that somebody came to him and told him, why did we let them go? And now he's gathering Egyptians. Come, you're my people. His officials too, his immediate family. Come, we're going to come against them. Because later on, again, we're going to see Pharaoh's army is going to be there, by the sea and dead in the sea. Now, chariots were vehicles of war. They each had 3 people or three riders on the chariot. One was the driver, and 2 of them were to fight. And then verse 7 says, also he took 600 choice chariots. In other words, he took the elite team. He took his elite team along, besides his people, and later on the rest of the army is going to come. Let's look at verse 10 now. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we would die in the wilderness. So by now, we know that there are more than 600 chariots now coming against them. So, okay, I have a little bit of compassion for the Egyptians. For the Israelites here. I would have been very afraid too of seeing such a vast army coming against me. But notice what they say. It says that they were very afraid, and then immediately after they're saying they were very afraid, they cried out to God, but they stopped and then they turned against Moses. They started complaining, telling him, didn't we tell you to leave us alone? Didn't we tell you just let us be servants? In other words, they wanted to stay being slaves. They wanted to be, they thought it was better, or they were lying to themselves that it was better to be slaves than to come out in liberty and freedom, from them by God. Now, this is a dramatic event taking place here. So, PTSD, here it is right here taking place. But I wanted to point this out because even though this is a very traumatic and very dramatic event taking place here, nowhere afterwards, after this event, do we see anybody going to the psychiatrist or the therapist or, taking any medicine for PTSD. I'm not denying that there is such a thing. So my question is, how did they deal with such harsh things? Now, I've never been to war. I've never been uh, seen death take place, so I'm not diminishing those effects. But the way they dealt with it is that God was in the midst of it. That was God. Now, it's not easy. I'm not going to say it is. I can't speak firsthand for it. And it's not easy. But God is the one who can and did the work. Today, many Christians immediately run to the doctor, to the hospital, for a quick pill to pop in for symptoms that we cause ourselves. Now, there are diseases, there are many difficult things that, because we're in a fallen world, yes. But what I said, that we often are the ones who cause these symptoms, and we're only masking the symptom, not addressing the issue, the main issue. And in the same way, even though we're talking about medical terms, in the same way, people will blame others as a symptom instead of taking responsibility and fixing it before the Lord. So the Lord, I'm not against doctors. The New Testament has the account of a doctor, a personal doctor to the Apostle Paul, Luke. Now, notice how quickly they turn against Moses again, because it says that they went out boldly. Back in verse 8, it says that they went out boldly from Egypt. In other words, they were with their head up, and in a sense, they're with their chin up, that we got this, we made it out. Huh. That's speaking more of being arrogant. They were arrogant leaving Egypt. So not only was God showing or will be showing a lesson to Pharaoh, one last lesson, but he's still showing his own people, you didn't do it. I did it. Because this, again, this verse 8, because they went out with boldness. That was an arrogant remark on their behalf. Now it says here, because there were no graves in Egypt, because they're blaming Moses, were they not? There's no graves. Is that the reason why you took us out and now you're wanting us to die? That's a great conspiracy theory right there. It's a great plan that Moses did, risk his own life. Yeah, I win. I took them out and I'm going to kill them out here. Yeah, great plan. And my question is, if there was truly no graves in Egypt, what happened to the people that died in the past 430 years? Where were they? If there was no graves, right? Now, talk about glorifying one's past. Because they said it is better that we would have stayed and served the Egyptians. They were saying it was better to live in their sin. For us Christians, that's what it is. It is better to live in my sin. We don't say those words, but sometimes we think about and we speak about our past life, kind of glorifying it. Man, that was such fun. Waking up wasted the next day. Yeah. The fun that we had. Now, I'm not saying don't share your testimony, but notice the attitude, because even Israel went out boldly, but they were being arrogant. Let's keep reading verse 13. And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." Contrast, or in comparison to Israel, Moses understood what God had told them. Somehow he's going to deliver them. Again, Moses doesn't even know yet how this is going to come about. He simply believed, and God told them, hold your peace. And now Moses is telling them, hold your peace. Too many Christians were full of information, but that's it. Full of information that we don't even know how to. Well, actually, we do know. We just choose to not do what we've already learned. Remember earlier, I mean, not earlier, but on Sunday, I mentioned James chapter 2, verse 18. My faith is proof of the works that I do. Or, I'm sorry, the works that I do is proof of my faith. Having information doesn't make you wise. Acting and using that information is what wisdom is. And using it in a godly way. That's what they were supposed to be doing. God had already spoken to them. But they were very, it says, very afraid. And they were complaining against Moses. You brought us out here to die, Moses. Verse 15, verse 15. And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry? Now this is God speaking to Moses. Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. But lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And I indeed will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. So I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gained honor for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen. There's a time to pray. But here God is telling Moses, stop praying. Stop praying. Why are you crying to me? In other words, stop praying and tell the people to move. Sometimes we waste too much time. Or we use it as an excuse. I'm waiting for the Lord to answer me. Here, Moses is told, move. Tell the people to move. Why are you crying to me? Why are you praying? Get going. Yes, I do not deny the power of prayer. Yes, we have to pray, and sometimes we do need to pray for a longer period of time. But the Bible tells us that once we pray humbly, once we pray, as soon as we, actually, I should say, even before we finish praying, the answer to that prayer has already been sent back to us. Daniel chapter 10, verse 11 through 13 tells us how, again, in our humble way, praying to God immediately gives us an answer. Sometimes we don't receive it immediately because the enemy withholds the angel that's coming to give us that answer. So God opens the Red Sea here for them. He's going to open the Red Sea, and it says here, verse 16, that they will walk on dry ground. Now, multiple times we're going to see that God emphasizes dry ground. Dry ground. Look at verse 19. And the angel, or I should say, and Jesus, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud and the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them. So in other words, he was in front, now he moves to the back. So he came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus it was a cloud and darkness to the one, darkness to the Egyptians, and he gave light by night to the other, light to the Israelites, so that the one did not come near the other all that night. So the event took place at night. according to this. And this pillar, Jesus, is protecting them and protects us from the enemy. He's not allowing the enemy to come near to them. He's giving them darkness while at the same time he's giving his people light. So to us, we have to see it in this sense, and really this is what it is. That God withholds the attacks of the enemy. We don't know how many attacks he's withholding at this very moment. Right now we're sitting here, we're reading the Bible, but we don't know how many attacks, spiritually speaking, God is withholding. He's not giving them permission. The enemy cannot do anything without the permission of God. And the story of Job, it specifically says that the enemy goes to heaven and asks God the Father permission. And if he doesn't receive permission, he cannot do anything. Now God allows certain things to come before us, but only certain things. And so here it says that God stood, or Jesus stood, between the two camps, or between Israel and Egypt. And to the Egyptians, again, he gave them darkness, and at the same time to the Israelites, he gave them light. He was still guiding them. And he allowed them to pass on dry ground. So God is omnipresent. He's everywhere and in one place at the same time. That's who God is. Verse 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night. It made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on, again he emphasizes, on dry ground. And the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. Now it came to pass in the morning watch, that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians. And he took up their chariot wheels so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." So critics of the Bible again have said that this event took place, or they crossed somewhere where the water was no more than a few inches tall. And I say again what I said earlier, if that was the case, that was a bigger miracle for God to even bring in those waters to cover the Egyptians completely afterwards. Because we're going to see that Moses then is instructed to call upon the waters to come back again. Now, I imagine this last verse, I imagine sort of like a cartoonish kind of event taking place here, because it says that God troubled them, the Egyptians. He removed the wheels from the chariots. So they're still going. It says that they drove them with difficulties. So they had the horses still pulling the chariots without wheels. And they're still going after them. But somebody, said, hey, maybe we should turn back. Duh. Maybe we should turn back because God, Jehovah, the true God, is fighting on their side. They're coming against us, the Egyptians. But no, they keep going. Hard-headed. Notice too that it never says that Pharaoh was in there. He sent his armies and all the chariots and all the horsemen. He sent them in. But he didn't go in. Not even his officials. Because it doesn't say his people. So you've seen the movies. You've seen some of the episodes from the series of the Bible. You always see Pharaoh standing at the top of a mountain, right, looking down at them. But he doesn't go in. Well, the Bible says here, he never mentions God never mentions Pharaoh going in. Verse 26. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, on their chariots and on their horsemen." And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, the sea returned its full depth, where the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea, Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. But the children of Israel had walked on dry ground. Again, how many times has God emphasized the dry ground in the midst of the sea? And the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So could you imagine? It took them all night long to cross the Red Sea. So it had to be a pretty good size opening. And it took them all night again, 3 million people plus their cattle, plus their all their possessions, all night long. Because God says there that He was withholding the water all night long with an east wind. An east wind. Because now, in the last watch, so approximately about 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning more or less, because, as the sun is coming up, this is when they finally, the last one crossed. And now God tells Moses, all right, now close in the waters. What were they seeing in the middle of the water? I mean, they're walking on dry ground. It's not just, they're not walking on mud. They're not walking on, moist sand. It's dry ground. And God emphasizes it multiple times. It's dry ground. 10-foot walls of water. I don't know if there's dolphins or sharks or, what kind of animals were they seeing there. The coral reef, I don't know. They had to be seeing them. I've seen cartoons when uh, where they're depicting the crossing of the Red Sea and somebody's there with the fishing pole, fishing. I know that didn't happen, but I think that's funny that somebody like, hey, look at the fish. Let's keep reading verse 30. So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. And it says that, the previous verse says that there was not one of them left. Verse 31, thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servants Moses. Okay, Moses, we believe you. Okay, we saw God work. Okay, we believe you again. Sorry. You didn't bring us out here to die. It's a sort of, it really is. If this was the ending, this would have been a great happy ending. Hey, the enemy is dead. They're on the other side. God delivered them. But wait, the plot thickens. Because this is only the beginning of their journey. Really, this is only the beginning of 40 years. And even after the 40 years that they're going to spend in the wilderness, there's still much work for them to do. There's still the book of Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and into the book of Joshua. They're not done. Which tells me that if it took them over 40 years, I'm already 46 years old. If it took them 40 years to get to the promised land, and God had a lot of work to do in them, He's got a lot of work to do in me. He's never going to be done, at least not in this earth, this time, until He returns for us. And the Bible does say that He will complete the work, the great work which He has started, into the great day of the Lord. So, we should be glad that God is not done with us. Because if He were done, just look at Israel. We're going to continue study in their life, 40 years. Then God is still going to be loving them. He's still going to be pursuing them. He's still going to be into the New Testament trying to get His people to come to Him. If He were to say one day, okay, you know what? I'm done with Israel. To me, that tells me that one day He could say to me as a Christian, okay, I'm done with you. I'm done working in you. But no, He's not done with Israel. He has not given up, will never give up on Israel. He will not give up on me. The next week, or the next time we meet, we're going to go to a concert. Because Moses is going to be singing. He's going to be the main attraction there. Moses. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord Jesus. Thank you for not giving up on us. Not that we are capable of doing any good work, but that you